Good evening, and welcome back. First and foremost, I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for the support I've already received for this project. The fact that at the time of recording, our first video already has as many views as it does, and that so many of you have already subscribed has my mind boggled. It may not seem like much to celebrate to some, but I'm more than elated to share this channel with the world, and knowing the world is seeing it and taking it all in makes it all the more worth it. So thank you, all of you. This week, we'll be taking some time away from the cults to venture into the minds of some of the most chronically online individuals this planet has to offer. Cults will be back next week, so make sure you've subscribed and have notifications turned on. That way, you'll always be up to date on all the videos produced by this channel. If you haven't seen the first episode of Cult Profiles yet, there's a link in the description. If you're here, you'll probably like that too. Welcome to Beyond the Threads, Tales of Obsidian Reddit Lore. In this series, we do what every other Reddit series does, feature stories or posts from subreddits like r/nosleep and r/letsnotmeet. If you know any Reddit stories you'd like to see featured in this series, comment below. You could see it in a future episode. This video definitely should have been out sooner, but I wanted to take the time to experiment a bit and make a more cinematic storytelling experience for you all to enjoy. Thank you for your patience, and without further ado, let's begin. Our first entry, Those Things We Fear, comes from user u/cmcbold. It has 3 parts. I'll be taking a pause between the parts to discuss the response from the community. I was visiting a childhood friend a few weeks ago who we will call Steve, and after reminiscing on the past for a while, we decided it was time to drink. We brought a cooler into the large property he had bought off his parents. This was the same place he and I grew up and I would often visit, so we knew the path to go down. We had a specific place in mind. When we were kids, we explored this property all over, pretending like there were monsters in the forest and scavenging for makeshift foods. Of course, a fort or base was high on the priority list, so when we found what appeared to be a doomsday-style bunker, we quickly established it as the hangout spot. Eventually, we got the generator in there to start working, and we would just watch movies and hang out. However, as we became teenagers, it also became a place to hide away alcohol and drink without his parents finding out. Even though we were now adults and Steve owned this property, there was something nostalgic about going out to the bunker to hang out. We talked for a while, but at some point, he had to go back to the house, but he assured me he'd be back in a few minutes. Considering it's about a 15-minute walk, I knew it would be a while, so while he was gone, I decided to go into the bunker and see if everything was still working. As I climbed down the ladder, the dust and cobwebs told me that it had been a minute since he had been down here. However, I eventually found the generator and some remaining gasoline in a container, and it started right up. The lights came on, and I realized he must have not been down there since we were teenagers. The steel chair setup was in the main area, with the television and VCR player hooked up. The storage area had plenty of old MREs and astronaut food, covered in a thin film of dust. I walked over to the VCR and noticed there was a dusty box next to it with several movies. As I shuffled through them, I came across a tape with black Sharpie on it labeled Those things I fear. I had no recollection of watching this, or even what it could be. However, I figured it was some obscure horror film, and I was pretty bored. I put the tape in the VCR and turned on the television, wiping the screen off so I could actually see. The tape showed just a black screen for about 15 seconds before an image came on that appeared to be a security camera from the upper corner of a room. There was a format for a time and date, but it appeared to be random numbers. In the room, there was a television and a couple of chairs. As I watched with curiosity, I noticed in the background a ladder come down. Then 2 teenagers began to climb down, and then sit down in the chairs. As I continued to watch, my blood ran cold. Those kids were me and Steve, but he had never been recording as far as I know. I look up to where the camera would have been, in the upper corner of the bunker. No camera, or any sign of a camera being there. I ejected the tape and shut off the bunker before heading back to Steve's house. I found him slumped on his couch, clearly unable to walk.
Steve? Did you have any cameras set up in the bunker when we were kids?
I asked him, unsure if he was in any state to respond.
Camera? No, man, why would I put cameras in there?
Steve responded, not giving it much thought.
Well, I found this tape and...
Put it back.
Steve interrupted, with a sudden sense of soberness in his voice. I began to respond when he stood up suddenly.
Listen to me carefully. Put it back where you found it, and come back to the house.
I nodded and headed back down the trail to do what he said. I wanted to question his strange reaction, but something told me he was right. At this point, I felt like eyes were on me from all directions as I made my way through the woods. I finally arrived at the bunker, placed the tape back in the box. Then I headed back. Steve didn't want to talk about it at all, and I decided not to push him on it. We hung out for the night, and the next day I returned home, forgetting about the experience entirely. I tried to chalk it up to some sort of weird prank, but that didn't seem too convincing of a theory. But either way, I pushed it out of my mind, getting back to my everyday life. That was until a week later. I had gotten home from work early that day. When I checked my mailbox, I found a package with no return address. When I opened it, all that was inside was a VHS tape. It was labeled, "Those Things You Fear." Is this a prank from Steve? I have no idea what to do. The only thing I know is that I am terrified, but I am also tempted to watch the tape. I have an old VHS player in my attic I could grab, but I'm not sure if that's wise. Please, any suggestions would be helpful. In the wake of this tantalizing tale, fellow Redditors gave mixed reviews as well as some suggestions and advice, with some suggesting he should watch it, others saying he should remove it from his mind completely. Some still were skeptical of Steve's involvement in the whole ordeal. A few days later, OP offered an update. So, it has been a few days since my first post, and a lot has happened since then. I'm so exhausted and stressed out, but I'm writing yet again because I'm not sure what else to do. I attempted to consider all of my options before making a decision about the tape. Many of you have warned me that watching the tape would be a terrible idea, and have suggested that the knowledge of what's on the tape simply isn't worth the risk. Others have said that I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it if I didn't watch it. And a few asked that if I do watch the tape, try to have Steve with me. Since it has been a few days, I broke down the days into entries for ease of reading. Thursday, October 12th, 2023. I called Steve to tell him about the second tape. Unfortunately, his cell went straight to voicemail. I tried to call him a few more times throughout the day, and the same thing occurred. I was starting to get worried. I had begun to consider driving out to his house to check on him, but he finally called me late that night.
Hey, Steve. I'm glad you're alright. I need to ask you about...
I do not want to talk about the tape.
He cut me off abruptly. I was caught off guard by this, but he continued.
You have no idea what you're getting into. Just forget about it.
Before I could respond, Steve hung up on me. He didn't respond to any more of my calls. I decided I should probably heed his advice, as well as most of the comments on my original post. I would forget about the tape. I didn't do anything as melodramatic as burning the tape, but I did throw it out. I figured that putting it out of sight would at least allow me to move on from it. I woke up in the middle of the night, standing in my living room. I was alarmed, but quickly realized I must have been sleepwalking. This had been something that had occurred frequently when I was a child, but it had been a very long time. I would have just assumed it was a minor relapse, until I realized what I held in my hand. I threw the tape in the bin outside once again, and went back to bed. I was a little rattled, but my exhaustion won out. I planned to figure out the mess in the morning. Friday, October 13th, 2023. I had the day off, and I tried best not to think about the tape, but something about it was alluring. Almost like it had a hold on me. I distracted myself throughout the day with video games, but eventually my mind would wander back to it. I called Steve again. Of course, he didn't respond or call back. At this point, I was getting worried about him, but based on his response the day before, I assumed he wanted to be left alone. It was starting to get late. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I went and found the tape from the bin outside and set up my VHS player. Everything inside of me was telling me this was a terrible idea, but my curiosity was winning out. I had to know what was on that tape. I took a deep breath and inserted the tape into the VHS player. As the screen flickered, I began to feel a deep sense of dread. I couldn't pinpoint why exactly, but deep down, I think I knew that I had made a mistake that there was no turning back from. The image appeared to be from the point of view of someone in the back seat of a vehicle, which was on the highway. It was hard to see what it was as it was crouched down, as if hiding from whoever it was in the driver's seat. I watched in anticipation, but nothing happened immediately. A call rang out from my cell phone, startling me. It was Steve. I quickly answered.
Hey man, I saw your post. Wait for me. I'm on the way.
Steve said, his breath heavy.
Steve? Why weren't you answering earlier?
I responded,
Listen, I'm sorry, but you have to trust me. Wait for me and don't watch the tape until I get there.
The camera on screen began to move, and suddenly it all clicked. It was the back seat of Steve's car. And now, it reared up. Steve was in full view, on the phone driving. He hasn't noticed yet.
Steve? Behind you.
I wasn't able to finish as the phone call dropped. The camera's point of view lunged towards him, and the screen went to static. That was the end of the tape. And then, radio silence. OP wasn't sure what to make of what was unfolding in front of him, and we received no update for months. The comments flooded with concern over the well-being of both OP and Steve. Others offered their take. All jokes aside, this ordeal had the community enamored. But where was OP? What happened to Steve that night? On December 14th, 2023, the silence was broken. OP returned for a final update. I wouldn't be expecting a happy ending though. Not here. Not in this place. It's been 2 months since I last posted, so I decided I should finally update any of you who cared to read. I am going to try to recount what has happened since last time, but some of the details are hazy. I have been in a haze, but I believe I've been able to recount the events accurately. Steve died in a car accident. That is the official story. I had no way to prove otherwise. I had considered turning in the tape as evidence to the police, but upon re-examining it, I was met with the grim reality that it was blank. Whatever I saw that day was not displayed on the tape. Of course, in hindsight, the tape appeared to be displaying footage as it happened, like some sort of analog live stream. I immediately packed up the necessities and got a hotel room in the neighboring town. I wasn't quite ready to quit my job, so I stayed there trying to figure out what I could about the situation I found myself in. While I had time to think, I decided to break down the facts. I found the first tape in a mysterious bunker that Steve claimed he hadn't entered for years. It displayed footage from a non-existent camera. Steve didn't want to talk about it, so he clearly knew something. The second tape was delivered directly to my mailbox. When I finally decided to watch the tape, it depicted Steve's final moments in real time. I made the trip out to his property. I got in pretty easily because I remembered his bad habit of keeping the back door unlocked. I entered the house to find it fairly well kept, and nothing initially seemed out of the ordinary. The one strange detail was the VHS player hooked up to the television in his living room, but given the circumstances, this wasn't surprising. However, I couldn't shake the sense of something's eyes on me. Maybe it was just paranoia, but could you blame me after what had happened so far? After searching almost the entire house, I finally got into his room. I put my hacking skills to the test by guessing the password to his computer. It was 1234. The last thing that was left open was my first post here. I knew something had to have spurred a sudden change of tone that day. I wonder if I had never posted, maybe he would still be alive. I then turned to a journal he had left on his computer desk. From its contents, it seemed to be a pretty typical diary, but as the entries went on, things progressively got more strange. He wrote about strange dreams, some of the pages even having his own sketches depicting shadowy figures with prominent, hollow eyes. Drawings of beings without form and ramblings without coherent meaning. Suddenly I heard creaking, which I discerned to be the sound of his back door being opened from the living room. I quickly closed the book and rushed out to the room. The door was still open, the wind howling. At the foot of the door was, unsurprisingly, a VHS tape. I walked over to it cautiously, closing the door and locking it. Then, I picked up the tape and read what was written on it. Those things we fear.
Those things you fear, those things I fear, those things we fear.
I said aloud to myself, trying to figure out what the correlation was. What did it mean? The more information I discovered, the less any of it made sense. I held the tape, contemplating my next move. I noticed the weather outside progressing into a windy storm. The scene was being set, and it seemed like my fate was imminent. After taking a deep breath, I put the tape into the VHS player. After a moment of static, the tape began with what appeared to be an analog television. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be the television from the bunker. Similar to the tape from the last entry, the point of view shown in this appeared to be that of someone, or something. It climbed out of the bunker and proceeded to move through the forest. Then it started moving down the trail, and I realized all too late what was happening. Whatever it was heading towards Steve's house. It was heading towards me. I looked around in a panic, taking note that the storm outside had escalated to a level of intensity that was bordering on causing damage to the house. On the tape, the entity was traversing through the forest at insane speeds, to the point where it appeared to be gliding across the forest floor, appearing like a long tracking shot. Before I knew it, the house was in its sights. At the last second, I ducked behind the couch, as the glass pane door shattered. I stayed crouched behind the couch, holding my breath. I peeked over to get a glimpse at the entity. I expected to see some sort of monstrosity or demonic beast standing in the living room. What I saw was far more confusing. There was nothing there. I looked at the television. It was still showing that thing's point of view, yet there was nothing visible to my naked eye. I realized that I couldn't see it. My only advantage was that I could see what it was seeing through the television. Luckily, it hadn't spotted me yet. I slowly crawled around the couch, mirroring it so my location couldn't be detected. Finally, I managed to get to the VCR. I clicked eject on the VCR. As the VHS tape began to eject, the last image I saw was the monster's POV snapping towards me. I clenched the VHS tightly and leapt towards the now shattered doors, unsure if this thing could harm me whilst I wasn't watching the tape. I got my answer as I heard the destruction of the television from behind me, as if something had leapt towards it. In the greatest burst of speed in my entire life, I made my way outside and battled through the storm towards my vehicle. I peeled out of his property, taking note in my rear view as a section of the fence collapsed. The monster was catching up to my truck, the only evidence of its existence being the mailboxes and fence posts that were laid out in its path of destruction. I booked it as fast as I could, finally making a highway and seemingly losing the entity. I drove for hours, until finally settling on a small town I hadn't heard of, in a neighboring state. I have been in a hotel since then, unsure of where the creature is. If I truly lost it, then I can't imagine it would be able to find me this far out. But maybe if I put the tape in again, I will be able to see its whereabouts. but something tells me that's what it wants. I have no idea what to do at this point. I'm running out of savings, and my will is growing weaker by the day. I don't know what to do. I've been getting nightmares. I have been seeing them. Those things that shouldn't be seen. We wish to know the things we shouldn't, and our curiosity cannot be quenched. Maybe some things don't need to be known. Those things that we can't comprehend. Those things we fear. And with that, we conclude tonight's dive into the mysterious world of Reddit. It's impossible not to wonder about the fate of these brave storytellers, our dear OPs, who let us peek into the eerie chapters of their lives. Here's hoping they all walk away unscathed, and maybe, just maybe, they'll have a trusty camcorder rolling if things take a darker turn. As we part ways with this tale, many questions still remain unanswered. Will there be further updates from OP? Did they escape the clutches of the unknown? Only time will tell. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. If you have had the unfortunate time of stumbling upon your own unsettling encounter, don't be afraid to share it in the comments. Your story may be featured someday on the channel. As we step away from the screen, keep those virtual and real-world lights on. If you find yourself wrapped up in one of these stories, sleep with one eye open and leave the hall light on. Goodbye for now. See you in the next one. Until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and may your nights be filled with the dance of the unknown.